how do I do better work with my clients? And I explain, sometimes I give them what can be a surprising answer. If you want to do better work with your clients, you need to start with yourself.
Your journey to wisdom, wealth, and wellness starts here. In this episode, host Jonathan Satovsky engages with Dr. Joy Lere, a clinical psychologist, on the intricate relationship between psychology and personal finance.
Welcome to today's episode of Seeking Wisdom, Wealth, and Wellness. This is Jonathan Satovsky of Satovsky Asset Management, and it's an absolute pleasure to have Dr. Joy Lere with us today because the topic is perfectly right up my alley. She's a leading voice in the psychology of money. As a licensed clinical psychologist and co-founder of Shaping Wealth, Dr. Lere masterfully weaves her expertise in both human behavior with a deep understanding of the way people experience money. Joy has held research and clinical positions at Penn Medical, Princeton Health, Children's National Medical Center, and the Department of Defense. That would be interesting to talk deeper about, and has served as an assistant clinical professor in clinical psychology at George Washington University. Thanks for joining us today, Joy.
I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's start. I'm just going to jump right in and talk about EQ. You know, as Buffett says, it's EQ more than IQ that leads to lifetime of success. So emotional intelligence has been found to produce measurable results in business. I've been told they touch on concepts such as empathy, self-awareness, self-motivation, social skills, self-regulation, relationship management. And I came across a powerful stat about EQ in the workplace. Over 80 to 90% of competencies that differentiate top performers from others are in emotional intelligence. So maybe you can tell us more about your work, specifically going from a clinical psychologist to jumping into the field of money, and what would you hope for people to understand or learn from you about this?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, when we talk about the importance and power of EQ in the workplace, I want you to think about the most successful people you know, the people you've enjoyed working with, the people you've enjoyed working for. You probably don't know much about their class rankings or standardized test scores. Early on in our careers, those kinds of things might get you in the door. But the things that are really going to advance you and differentiate you, especially the closer you climb to the top, are going to be the things that are related and mapped to EQ. So like you talk about, it's self-awareness, understanding, knowing your feelings. When we talk about money, often we get this mistaken message, we need to just check our feelings at the door. No, all of our emotions provide us with information. So part of what's important about self-awareness is developing emotional literacy, understanding what am I feeling and why? What can I do with this information that is going to then serve me and my relationships well later on? Another important component of self-awareness is understanding and having an accurate view of how other people experience you. So who's helping you see your blind spots? Then we move to self-management. So I have all these feelings. What am I going to do with them? How do I marshal my impulses and keep things in check so that I can stay on track towards my goals? And then there's the dimension. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, it seems like a lifetime process.
It is for all of us. We are all on this journey together. And then there's the dimensions of EQ that relate to our relationships with others. So I explain to people this EQ self-work is a prerequisite to things like empathy. So people often mistake empathy and think, well, does empathy mean I'm just sympathizing with people or I'm having the exact same feeling as they are having at any given time? No, empathy isn't saying I feel this at the same time. It's saying I know what it is to feel hurt, disappointed, scared, terrified, anxious. But in order to do that, we have to know and think back to, oh, there's a time when I've been in the same place. So that's where we have to tie back to self-awareness. And then social skills, that's where we can use our empathy to really be effective in our exchanges with people. So I'm really excited about really talking, particularly within the wealth management industry, and talking to, clients about the importance and how they can leverage EQ and emotion in their financial lives, in their professional lives.
So I love what you're doing. I love the field. In fact, what I gleaned from your work at Shaping Wealth is trying to help cover the blind spots and be the emotional regulator for the advisor to be able to help them develop their self-awareness and self-compassion to impact other lives and,
exactly.
and multiply the influence of that work, if I got that correctly. And I think it's a beautiful thing.
So often advisors will come to me, and this makes sense. They're coming with a pain point. So they're wanting to know, how do I do better work with my clients? And I explain, sometimes I give them what can be a surprising answer. If you want to do better work with your clients, you need to start with yourself. Because for those of us, I'm in a helping profession, advisors are too. You're on the front lines of having conversations with people that they aren't having with anyone else, talking about one of the most intimate aspects of their lives, their money. But we can't expect our clients to go anywhere we haven't gone ourselves. So that's where starting with the advisor is such a crucial step to then having stronger skills when it comes to engaging with empathy and other relational and communication skills. There has to be that foundation there.
I love that. In fact, I think one of your posts on Instagram I stumbled across that landed quite profoundly on me in terms of raising a level of awareness of blind spots was a Carl Jung quote that said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." And I had to pause because I think the vast majority of the population, when you say covering blind spots, people have these unconscious patterns and biases that are getting their own way. So your job as a clinical therapist, probably even before you got into the money field, you realize you have to peel back the onion to get them to see what they're not even aware of, because if they can see it and work on it and work through that, that self-compassion can lead to a tremendous amount of empathy and self-compassion for their ecosystem that they have the fortune to influence. Is that, am I striking a chord there?
Yes. Blind spots are such an important thing for us to talk about. And for anyone who's serious about their own personal and professional growth, you have to have people who can refract a view of you that you simply cannot see. Because sometimes when we are engaging with someone, our intent does not match our impact. And we need to have some feedback. Sometimes that's pretty uncomfortable to make sure that we are bridging that gap. We talk a lot about giving feedback, but there's a real art to receiving feedback, both non-defensively, taking it gracefully, and really taking that in and stepping back and saying, okay, what can I take from what I just learned? Regardless of what emotions may have gotten triggered, hearing something that isn't necessarily what we want to hear, or doesn't match our self-view at that time. Because as humans,
I was going to say, that's so powerful. I don't want to lose that thought. Because in every interaction, when you speak to someone, people aren't even aware of their quick defensiveness rather than them having a degree of psychological safety, or the word I often use is carefrontation, where that they know I'm coming from a loving place to point out your blind spot in order to elevate you, not to hurt you, but to challenge you to be a better version of yourself.
Exactly. And there's something there when we are in a position to provide feedback. I think it's really important to have a foundation of a relationship. Someone needs to trust that this is coming from a place of you're really believing in them and having high expectations for them and thinking, okay, I care enough to tell you something that's probably going to be uncomfortable. I'm going to take the time to have this hard conversation with you because I know and trust that maybe this isn't who you want to be, and you are bought in to being the best version of yourself.
I love that.
Sometimes as a clinician, I'm in a really privileged place because as we think about the relationships in our lives, most people are in multiple roles, and it becomes really hard to give really honest, candid feedback because we have to manage the relationship. When I'm providing feedback to my spouse, he's going to receive that differently from me. And I have to continue to see and interact with him. The same is true of my colleagues, all these people. But when I'm doing executive coaching, when I'm working with someone in psychotherapy, the only thing I have a vested interest in is not them being happy with me or liking what I say, but it's my providing honest feedback with candor, but also compassion so that they can take it in, because I'm in a position to say things that no one else in their life maybe has the courage to say because of the nature of their relationship. So that's why I think it is so important for anyone who's very serious about leveling up personally and professionally to have an inner circle, be working with a third party whose only vested interest is helping them really develop a more realistic view of themselves.
That's
so
genius.
That they can step back and ask, is that who I want to be? Because our lives, go ahead.
I was going to say, I love that because I don't mean to interject. I mean, you're on a roll, but I used to say when someone said, what do we do for a living? And I said, we're private psychotherapists who manage money, and to a degree we are. But of course, that cheeky comment doesn't always land well on people. They're just like, interesting. And then they want to change the subject.
Yeah. Yeah.
But your theme, your theme of finding contentment for everyone, your theme of trying to find contentment for everyone strikes on this because that's I read a study or heard a study that when you do something hedonistically pleasurable for yourself, it changes your RNA in your bloodstream for a day. But if you do something to impact someone else's life, it changes the RNA in your bloodstream for a week. So you do truly get by giving, which is what you're trying to unlock and empower the advisors that you're able to impact and influence, I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
when we talk about,
go ahead.
When we talk about,
I feel like I could speak to you for like 16 hours. So it's like there's so many topics we can dig into here. So
absolutely. No, I love it. When we talk about funded contentment, we're talking about creating a life that's meaningful to you. And that starts with self-awareness in many ways, because so many people move through their lives borrowing other people's dreams. We need to slow down, step back and ask, who am I? Who do I want to be? What do I really want? How can I build a life today that is going to bring me joy, that creates a sense of purpose? What does that look like? What does that require of me?
So in the financial advisor's role, I think many advisors, there's an advisor that I met really young in my professional career that said, I don't want to work with anyone until they're 50 and over, because they wouldn't get that concept, what you just described, which it didn't strike me. Now I'm over 50. Now I'm starting to get it. It's almost slow learner, but nonetheless, a follow-on question for theoretically the advisors and or the population under 50 who aren't necessarily leveling up their consciousness, and they're so worried about making money or losing money, and their animal instincts are at the forefront of their brain. How do you deal with the animal instincts for loss aversion in modern markets? Because ultimately, both for the advisor's mental and financial freedom and the consumer's mental and financial freedom requires suspending disbelief and looking past the valleys of tumult in the headlines and the news and the markets. And I'm curious as how do you tackle that and accelerate someone's learning self-awareness in that regard?
It's interesting because as you put that out there, I go to the importance of the relationship. Advisors can see things that their clients can't, going back to blind spots. In those moments when a client is coming to you incredibly panicked, worried, and unable to see the big picture, because that's what our emotions do. That's what a bias like loss aversion can do. Really, we need to understand that underneath some of these choices that unfortunately have been labeled as irrational, like it's just humans trying to survive. People are wrestling with this question, am I going to be okay? And that can drive a lot of behaviors that don't serve them in the long run. But if you have the foundation of a relationship established that's built on trust, let's go back to EQ. How do we build that strong relationship? Then a person is going to be able to take in what you have to say. But advisors need to understand when someone is coming to you in an emotional state, you are not going to logic them out of a feeling, nor should that be the goal. But if an advisor can learn those skills of how to validate that emotional experience, that fear, that anxiety, they don't have to agree with it. That's not what validation is, but it's letting someone know, I see you, I understand. I've felt that way myself before. So that can kind of lower someone's emotional thermometer. So then they can take in the message and the reminder that maybe on the surface looks more reasonable. And remind them, the reason you hired me was especially for these moments, because we know money is an emotional lightning rod. So I'm here to remind you, this is our plan. We are working toward the same goal, which is ultimately you flourishing financially. And as someone you've entrusted your financial well-being to, I'm going to remind you, these are the steps we planned in advance. So there's something about the messaging there. We aren't going to get rid of a bias. We aren't going to get rid of someone's financial anxiety or fear, but it's understanding and appreciating that as humans, we aren't being crazy. We're trying to move through the world, blowing up our lives. We are all hardwired for survival. But when it comes to our financial lives, sometimes these instincts that in a certain situation early on that may have served us, we've outgrown, they don't fit the current situation, but it's almost as though our brains don't hit refresh and they aren't recognizing, actually, in this moment, that choice is not going to serve me.
It's apparently, as I've read, 87% of millennials are motivated by emotional intelligence of their leaders to help their company succeed. But I would view beyond their leaders, theoretically, their financial advisors or their advisory team is an extension of that leadership. And that support system is, an extension of the therapy, and that what you're describing, that is extraordinarily powerful. And it's sort of an unseen impact in such a positive way. So anyway, let me change topics a bit. In the concept of, you've done some research and or experiences that you've had regarding the emotional impact emotional intelligence impact on mental health, well-being, particularly preventing burnout, or how do we prevent burnout? Where do you see the heaviest cases of burnout in your experience or in financial services, and what are the what are the things that you've done to tackle or mitigate these challenges for the people that have been lucky enough to be in your orbit?
Absolutely. This is a topic I'm really passionate about. The word, and let's back up a little bit. The word burnout is tossed around. Like, what does that mean? And does it mean I'm stressed out at work? Does it mean I'm tired? Clinically, when we're talking about burnout, we're talking, it has three components to it. First of all, we have just emotional exhaustion, just feeling really tapped out. That level of emotional exhaustion is not something you sleep away. It's not something that one vacation is going to fix. Also, when someone is burned out, they start to develop a sense of depersonalization. And what that essentially means is you start to feel indifferent toward your work. If someone is working with clients, you almost disconnect from them as fellow humans. And this is one more meeting or one more thing on my schedule to get through. And then finally, we have a diminished sense of personal accomplishment. So this happens when someone steps back and they're like, and what am I doing? Does it even matter? Am I making a difference? And I think there are ways in which certain institutions can exacerbate that. But sometimes that can just come from internal discouragement. And as professionals, sometimes we're in a place where we don't always see our wins. So there's not always that reinforcement of, okay, what I do matters. So if we can't really believe and buy into that in a deep place, it can feel like, oh, why? Why am I even doing this? So when we have that constellation, that leads to burnout over time. And there are things that we can put in this burnout. When we talk about burnout, we need to think about addressing it both on an individual and an institutional level. So I often ask advisors, wait, who helps the helpers? There are very few places and people who are really bought in and understand the importance of advisor well-being. Because that issue, it is impacting advisors, it is impacting firms, and it is impacting that end client. If you have professionals who are not performing at their peak. So how can the individual advisor get better at helping themselves? So we want to think about boundaries. I tell people boundaries are the antidote to burnout. So what are the limits you are setting both with yourself and with other people? Now, our boundaries aren't requests. Our boundaries are actually what we do proactively, how we defend the lines that we set. It's saying no. Our boundaries don't require anything from someone else. Our boundaries require us to say, okay, they did this. The ball's back in my court. What am I going to do? Also, I talk with people when it comes to burnout and emotion regulation and stress management in general. There are three basic things that are going to make a huge difference in our lives, and they are low-hanging fruit. But if someone is struggling with burnout, there's a high likelihood at least one of them is going to be off. So every day I encourage people to be thinking top of mind, how can I be intentional about my sleep, what I'm eating, and moving in some way?
Hold on, before we get to that, because I think this is good, and you're on to a healthy thing about the habits, because I think I read yesterday just randomly that it takes 6 weeks to develop habits. So I want to dig deeper on what you're striking upon now as the potential anecdotes or solutions to help the advisor, to help their team, to help the end client in their ecosystem. And it's important because I think, I guess I read a lot of stats, but 15,000 workers in 15 countries, according to a McKinsey study in 2022, showed that 76% of respondents in a Mental Health America and Flex Job study agreed that workplace stress affects mental health, and 75% experience burnout. So it's unbelievably important what you're striking upon. So I want to dig deeper on what you're saying on the habits that can tip the scales, because I think you talked about this in one of your Substack posts, substack.com @JoyLere. I think the title was Tipping the Scales. You wrote, when it comes to nutrition and exercise, the knowing-doing divide isn't a gap, it's a chasm. Yeah. So people might know they need to sleep, they need to exercise, they need to eat better. But if we can't figure out how to bridge this gap, people are going to keep dying. So what is that doing gap, and how do you suggest we bridge that gap?
So I explain to people, I see 3 things in that chasm, and that is ourselves, our environment, and the people around us. So when we look at ourselves between the knowing and the doing, information and insight is necessary but insufficient by itself to make meaningful changes. So when I am talking to people about, okay, yes, you can tell me all the right things to do. Why aren't you doing them? You are an intelligent person. Oftentimes people come into therapy because they're feeling really stuck. They're like, I know the right thing to do, but for 30 years, I've not been able to do it. I've been successful in these other areas of my life. Why am I struggling here? So I think sometimes that requires us to step back and dig a little bit deeper. What's happening below the surface? And I challenge people when it comes to self-sabotage. Sometimes forms of self-sabotage are in the moment. Self-sabotage can be rewards or punishments that actually masquerade in the moment as rewards. So I'm going to make this choice, choose the action. It may be something related to diet. It may be I'm going to hit the snooze button again instead of going out and getting 15 minutes of sunshine. Like, I deserve this. Wait, what does your future self deserve? Why are you treating your future self this way? And I then ask people, what do you believe that you really deserve? What are you worthy of? What is your behavior telling us about what you really believe?
I'm sure you've heard the book, The Body Tells the Score, or maybe you've read it or heard about it. So when you're tired, sleep. When you're feeling a little like you're sitting too much, stand up, go get some fresh air. I think the volume of our brains functioning, sitting down, staring at screens 8 to 10 hours a day is not constructive to our creativity and our imagination and our unlocking our human potential. But taking a walk in nature I've found it has a profound effect. So I think
it's huge.
Those habits are material. I feel like I could speak to you for like 16 hours. There's so much to dig into, and but let me try to cover a couple little things before we wrap up. I saw this post from Nick McGilly the other day, and I'd love your reaction from a psychology point of view. Nick wrote, "I'm convinced that your house and your clothing are the only publicly acceptable ways to showcase your wealth. Tell someone you have a $2 million brokerage account and you're a jerk, but show someone you have a $2 million home and wear shoes and no one bats an eye." Yeah. How do you respond to that? I mean, this is part of the psychology of external scorecard, internal scorecard, and I maybe it goes back to the unfulfilled lives of parents, perhaps,
I love Nick's work. He's a tremendous guy. So anyone who's not familiar with his blog, his book, definitely check that out. Yeah. I absolutely agree. We spend, and this can wreak a lot of havoc for people financially. We spend a lot of our lives if we aren't secure in ourselves, performing for other people. Money, we use money as a form of communication.
Yeah.
And I think people are driven to do that more if they are insecure. Why? What message are you trying to send to the outside world? And why is that so important? And the things people do to try to impress strangers that create a lot of heartache and stress in their lives are huge. And again, that comes from a place of what am I trying to accomplish? What is the underlying need that maybe has been unfulfilled?
It requires a tremendous amount of self-awareness for people to realize what they're doing consciously or unconsciously. Or in a couple, I think you had written a little bit about bedroom and bank accounts. How many couples, seeing that we have a challenge of communicating and about money is the one of the most challenging things. So hopefully people can find you and tap into your wisdom. Where can people find you if people want to connect with you? You have a lot of different avenues for people to gather some of your wisdom. Maybe you could share with us how people can look you up and get more from your wisdom.
Absolutely. So you can, a lot of the work that I do with advisors, training and consulting opportunities, you can visit our company's website, shapingwealth.com. I also have a private practice website, which is just my name, JOYLERE.com. You've referenced my Substack a couple of times, Finding Joy, where I muse about all things EQ, and that is joyleary.substack.com. You can also find me on Twitter at joyleary, and then my degree, PSYD, and I'm on LinkedIn, Joy Leary Psyd as well.
Wow. Well, I feel lucky to have spent a half an hour with you. I have a couple of, just for fun, a little bonus question or two. Maybe I can strike your fancy. What books or what book should everyone who wants to improve read? Is there a book or two you could recommend that would help someone? I know there's no quick fix, 5 steps, but certainly maybe get someone started on their journey to raise their level of self-awareness and move them on the path to self-compassion and compassion for their fellow humans,
Absolutely. There's a book I love related to some of what we talked about today. Thanks for the feedback. That's a great one. Also, one of my favorite books that I read last year, and this ties to the burnout piece, is The Good Enough Job. I think it's really important for all of us to step back and re-examine our relationship with work and our relationship with rest. And there's a lot of really useful, thought-provoking things in that read as well.
Well, again, it's been a true honor to get a half hour with you. Again, I wish I had 30 hours to spend with you. I don't know if I referenced this before, but I heard Matthew Ricard, who was apparently the happiest person on earth, according to brain study or neuroscience, talk about the idea that really the essence of joy in human life is to reduce human suffering, to live a fulfilled life, not the pursuit of more money, more power, more fame, more recognition, but to reduce human suffering for others. And certainly some of the tips and some of the techniques and ideas of raising people's self-awareness that you've shared are going to go a long way to impacting and influencing many lives. So thank you so much. Again, this has been Jonathan Satovsky. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcast at satovsky.com/podcast. And until next time, enjoy your journey.
Satovsky Asset Management, hyper-personalized wealth management that has created joy and abundance since 2007.